Alara Boone had always imagined that childbirth would bring a hush of tenderness, a softening of voices, maybe even a blessing whispered over the new life she carried. Instead, the first sound she heard after her baby's cry was Ruth Boone's sharp inhale. An intake so jagged it felt like the world itself had paused to witness judgment. Lamplight carved harsh shadows across the small cabin, and Ruth's face twisted as she stared at the newborn's dark skin, her shock curdling into something venomous. Alara, still panting and trembling, tried to lift the child to her chest, but Ruth stepped back as if the infant were a serpent. In that moment, something cold and merciless settled over the cabin, and Alara knew her fate before the words even left Ruth's mouth. Ruth ordered her out, no hesitation, no mercy, not even the courtesy of letting Alara's legs stop shaking from labor. She tugged open the door, letting in a slap of night air, and pointed outside with the rigidity of a judge condemning a prisoner. Alara tried to plead, voice thin and breathless, but Ruth grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the doorway. Pain shot through Alara's abdomen, her knees buckled, and she nearly fell with the baby still weakly crying in her arms. Ruth didn't care. With one last shove, she cast Alara into the dirt, the door slamming behind her like the lid of a coffin. Alara sank to her knees, cradling the infant against her chest to shield him from the cold. The ground beneath her was still warm from the day's heat, but the night felt merciless, the darkness stretching wide and empty around her. Her body throbbed with fresh trauma, every breath a struggle as her shame pressed down like a physical weight. She knew the town of Sagebrush Hollow too well, knew how gossip jumped from porch to porch, how whispers traveled quicker than horses. If anyone found her here like this, they would think the worst. They always did. She rocked the baby gently, murmuring soft apologies she didn't deserve to speak. She wasn't ashamed of him, never had been, but she was terrified, confused, and so impossibly alone. Minutes slipped by in heavy silence, broken only by the infant's breathing and the far-off sound of an owl. She wondered if she should try to stand, to walk toward the riverbank where the sage grew tall, to hide until dawn. But her legs refused her, trembling too violently to trust. Then she heard it, a horse's slow approach, hooves crunching through dry soil, steady and unhurried. Alara's head snapped up, heart pounding. A figure came into view atop a tall sorrel horse, his posture weary but alert. As he drew closer, the moon caught the outline of his face. Hayes Walker, the quiet cowboy who kept mostly to himself, whose words were scarce but whose silences always felt strangely kind. He pulled his horse to a halt a few paces away, removing his hat with a respectful dip as he took in the sight of her kneeling in the dirt, cradling a newborn with shaking arms. "Alara," he whispered, as if afraid sound alone might break her further. "What happened?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Only tears spilled, silently carving paths down her cheeks. She didn't need to speak. The truth was written in her posture, her torn dress, her trembling body still marked by the violence of birth. Hayes dismounted, moving slowly, every step deliberate. He crouched before her, lowering himself to her level, letting the lantern glow from the cabin behind outline the sorrow in her eyes. He didn't reach for her or the baby. He simply waited, offering presence instead of intrusion. Finally, in a voice rasped raw, she managed, "They threw us out." Hayes inhaled deeply, jaw tightening, though his eyes remained soft. He removed his coat and draped it gently around her shoulders, tucking the fabric around the baby with a tenderness that nearly undid her. She felt warmth seep into her bones, unexpected and overwhelming. The cowboy glanced toward the cabin door, reading the cruelty in its silence, then looked back at her, expression darkening with quiet, protective fury. "You can't stay out here," he said, voice low but resolute, "and I won't leave you like this." Before Alara could protest, the distant glow of a lantern flickered to life across the path. Marshal Tully Briggs making his rounds. His silhouette paused when he spotted them, and though he said nothing, his posture changed, stiffening with curiosity. In Sagebrush Hollow, curiosity was the first stage of gossip. Hayes knew it. Alara knew it. The whole town would soon know she was on the ground with a newborn and a cowboy beside her. Hayes rose, offering his hand, not forcing, just offering. Alara hesitated, torn between fear of more humiliation and the flickering hope that someone might finally stand with her, even for a moment. Then her baby whimpered, and instinct pushed her forward. She placed her hand in Hayes's, letting him lift her gently to her feet. He guided her toward his horse with a quiet steadiness that eased her trembling. The marshal rode off in haste, likely eager to share what he'd seen. Lanterns would light across the town soon. Rumors would follow. Judgment would arrive before dawn. Hayes looked back only once, eyes narrowing as the distant shadows stirred away. Then he helped Alara onto his horse, positioned her safely with the baby nestled in her arms, and began leading her toward a place where the night might offer its first sliver of mercy. Behind them, the cabin remained dark, but the town of Sagebrush Hollow was waking, and it was coming for her. Alara woke to the gentle weight of quilts pressing against her, and the scent of sage simmering in May Cotter's kettle. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memory of last night crashed back through her. Ruth's scream, the baby's cry, the cold dirt beneath her knees, Hayes's steady hands lifting her into safety. The baby slept beside her now, his breath soft, his tiny fingers curled as if holding on to her even in dreams. Her body ached from childbirth and from humiliation, but for the first time in hours she felt sheltered. May entered with slow steps, her gray braids slipping over one shoulder, eyes warm with understanding. "You're safe here," she murmured, checking the baby with experienced hands. "Hayes carried you like he wouldn't let the world touch you." Alara swallowed hard, unable to speak. Gratitude and shame twisted inside her, softening her strength. Outside the window, she caught sight of Hayes leaning on the porch rail, hat tipped low to give her privacy. Even through the glass, she sensed the quiet resolve in him. But safety was fragile. May's voice lowered. "The town is talking. They think you betrayed your husband." Alara stiffened, clutching the quilt. "I didn't," she whispered, though she'd lost count of how many times her truth had been ignored. May's expression shifted, still kind, but shadowed by something heavier. She sat beside Alara, folding her hands deliberately. "There is something you must hear," she began. "Something I should have told you long ago." May revealed a history buried in silence. Alara's late husband, Thomas Boone, had African heritage through his grandfather, a truth Ruth had hidden from the world, and even from Alara. The baby did not signal an affair. He carried the blood of Thomas's family. Alara stared, numbness sweeping over her. All the cruelty she suffered, all the shame forced upon her, had been built on a lie. Ruth protected more fiercely than her own son's widow. Tears spilled silently, relief mixing with grief for the years stolen from her by deceit. Before she could gather herself, a heavy pounding struck the door. May rose quickly, but Ruth Boone burst in before it could be fully opened. Her eyes were wild, her breath sharp with fury. Two townsfolk followed behind, faces twisted with suspicion. "I'm taking my grandson," Ruth declared, pointing a trembling finger at the infant. "He'll be raised under the Boone name, not by a woman who disgraces it." Alara froze, the room spinning. May stepped in front of her, but Ruth stepped closer, voice rising. "She admitted it last night, said the baby wasn't Thomas's. She's unfit. I will not let her stain our legacy." Alara couldn't move. She could barely breathe. The walls felt too small, the air too tight. But Hayes pushed through the doorway as if drawn by the sound of danger. His presence filled the room in a way that silenced every voice. "That's enough," he said quietly, stepping between Ruth and the bed. His tone held no violence, but the firmness in it was unshakable. Ruth rounded on him, but Hayes didn't waver. "You knew," he said softly. "Thomas's grandfather, his heritage. You knew, and you hid it. And now you'd punish her for the truth you buried." The townsfolk shifted, doubt flickering in their eyes. Ruth's face drained, then flushed. "Lies," she hissed, though her voice trembled. May moved to the cupboard and retrieved a worn ledger, the medical record she had kept for the Boone family across 2 generations. She opened it to a page marked with faded ink, genealogies and notes of lineage written in careful script. The truth stood undeniable in May's steady hands. Ruth faltered, shoulders collapsing inward as if years of bitterness finally weighed too heavy. But shame turned quickly to desperation. In one reckless motion, she lunged toward the baby, fingers reaching. Alara screamed. Before Ruth could touch the child, Hayes caught her wrist, not harshly, but with enough strength to halt her entirely. The room held its breath. "You will not take him," Hayes said, voice low and steady. "Not from his mother. Not after what you've done." Ruth tore free and fled, stumbling into the sunlight with the townsfolk following, whispering now not about Elara, but about her. Alara's sobs broke open then, raw, relieved, terrified. Hayes knelt beside her, offering no empty promises, only presence. He helped her sit up, guiding the baby into her arms as if returning something sacred. Their eyes met, and in the trembling quiet between them, something shifted. A fragile trust, a recognition of two lonely lives crossing in the ruins of injustice. Hayes stood and walked to the doorway. Outside, neighbors lingered in cautious clusters, unsure how to face the truth unraveling before them. Hayes lifted a quilt above the baby to shade him from the light and faced the murmuring crowd. "She will stay here," he said calmly. "And anyone with judgment to spare can bring it to me first." The crowd thinned gradually, heads lowered, their certainty shaken. When the last of them drifted away, Elara looked out from May's window and felt, for the first time in months, the faint stir of hope in her chest. And though the road ahead was dangerous, one truth had risen unshakable. Shame could be built on lies, but dignity could be rebuilt on courage. She wasn't alone anymore, not in her fear, and not in her future.